Order, order. Slane Saxby to move the motion.
I beg to move that this House has considered the availability of affordable housing in Devon and Cornwall. And it is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Mr Hoyes. I hate the word crisis, but there is no doubt in my mind that we do have a housing crisis across Devon and Cornwall, particularly acute in my North Devon constituency, meaning there simply is virtually no housing available for local people, affordable or otherwise. The Chamber Engagement Team this weekend secured over 200 responses. The strength of feeling is so high. Constituents' experience of this issue driving my application for today's debate. Carol, one of my constituents. For me personally, I'm a single woman, 2 years off retirement. I will not be able to retire completely because private rents are too high for one person on a pension. I'm at risk of being homeless because of this. I'm not eligible for help if I lose my house because I cannot afford to live here anymore. Rachel, we've been given notice to move out after 10 years, so our landlord can use the house for family holidays. But we cannot find another family home in Braunton. There's simply nothing available, likely due to the increased number of holiday lets. Catherine, we were saving to buy a house 3 years ago. Unfortunately, having reached our savings target 18 months ago, we have been unable to buy due to the huge increase in house prices in North Devon during the last 2 years. We now require more than double our original savings target for a deposit, so are stuck renting until something changes. Stephanie, despite working, 2 of our children who live in Devon with children of their own are now suffering poverty due to high and increasing rent and no possible chance of either social housing or owning a home. They are likely to need deposits of approximately £150,000, as their wages would only cover a mortgage to approximately £90,000. It's no good claiming there are schemes when only 5% deposit is needed, when house prices far exceed earnings. So what exactly is going on? Figures from the Land Registry detail that house prices in North Devon have risen by 22.5% against a UK average of 8%, the second highest in England, with neighbouring Torridge coming in at 5th at 19.9%. At the same time, we have seen a complete collapse of the private rental sector as landlords take advantage of the surge in domestic tourism during the pandemic, with currently Barnstaple, with a population over 35,000, having just 3 private rentals available on Rightmove and 234 holiday lets on Airbnb.
On that point, would my honourable friend, does she agree with me that the situation at the moment allows landlords to buy up good residences in towns like Barnstaple and Bideford, register themselves as businesses, apply for a small business interest rate relief, pay nothing to the community, either in council tax or business rates, provide very little by way of employment, and that racket has to be stopped?
Yeah. My right honourable friend, as always, and neighbour, makes an excellent point, and indeed there is so much that needs to be done here in Devon and Cornwall. And building on the point I was making about the availability of property, Ilfracombe today has just 1 private rental and over 300 holiday lets. Apparently, there has been a 67% reduction in rented housing comparing August 2021 to 2019. Making North Devon the worst affected in the southwest and the 4th worst nationally. And despite an improvement in the management of the list, the council report that we have a 32% increase in applications, with local affordable housing providers advising a 4 to 5 times increase in the number of applicants for each new affordable rental property. From the data available, our district council reports that we have lost 467 houses from the permanent occupied market to second homes and short-term holiday lets, at a time when the rate of new developments has dropped right off due to the pandemic.
Thank you very much. Would my right honourable friend agree that the government needs to look at a bold policy intervention in this area to tackle the impact of second home ownership? One such policy could be to allow councils to reserve a percentage of new builds for people with a local family or economic connection to an area.
I thank my honourable friend for his intervention, and indeed I agree, and in my constituency many of these homes are reserved for local people, and I will come on to explain some of the further issues around this. And so I know the Secretary of State has conceded we have not built enough affordable homes, and he is indeed right.
Thank my honourable friend from North Devon for giving way, and thank you for getting this debate. In Columpton, in mid-Devon, we're putting up what's called Z-pods, which are a very good modular housing, which are zero carbon and are equipped with triple glazing. They're also going on to garage sites and the like, and are actually put up quite quickly. And I think if we want to sort of push to get more housing done, then I think this is one way where we can actually produce some good affordable housing, good quality, good for the environment, and also actually help to reduce those numbers on the waiting list.
And I thank my honourable friend for his intervention, and it also highlights another important point, that in Devon we have a large number of very small district councils all tackling with the same issue, coming up with different solutions. And as I was saying about building homes, the building rates in North Devon, in fairness, historically have been good. However, we are currently only averaging 18% affordables on each development. And as indeed the Affordable Housing Commission concluded in 2020, many of these products are clearly unaffordable to those on mid or lower incomes. And with some of the lowest productivity figures in the country and an abundance of part-time and seasonal work, we clearly have a lot of residents in this category.
She makes a very good point about the affordability point. Isn't it important to make sure that our county council statistics on the average earnings are actually reflective of what in-county people are earning? Because all across Devon you see that actually the average earnings per year are not relating to the people who want to afford houses and who work in the area in the same place.
And my honourable friend makes a very good point, particularly in the south of our county, which is an enormous county, where they can get out to other places, where we up in the north, unless we're working in London, we are very much in North Devon. And we're finding there that many of the new builds are snapped up for holiday lets or second homes. Many never even make it to market. They're purchased off-plan before they see the light of day for local residents. Building right down the Devon and Cornwall Peninsula is difficult. We have higher land prices. On the north coast particularly, we have fewer resources to build and materials to build with, making viability so challenging that the percentage affordables drops right off. Indeed, many of the issues impacting the housing market at present are particularly extreme on the coast. And we have an abundance of beautiful coast in Devon and Cornwall. Products which should work so well in North Devon, with its abundance of tiny communities, looking at community land trusts, find repeatedly that the high unit grant rates required on sites which often are challenging and have high abnormals, there is still a funding gap of £30,000 per unit, despite the generous Registered Providers and Homes England Affordable Homes Programme grant rates. Hopefully, I have detailed the magnitude and complexity of the problem. Indeed, I have been walking this road here for over 18 months, and I am grateful to the ministerial team for hearing from me quite so often on this topic. However, what I am struggling to convey is the urgency of a need for a solution. With summer now approaching, we are expecting and indeed seeing another surge in Section 21s as landlords find ways to evict tenants to enable them to convert to holiday lets. With no registration scheme in place, there is literally no formal record of how many people are renting properties out on a short-term basis. We desperately need the consultation concluded into registration for short-term holiday lets, which to date hasn't even started, despite being announced last June. I am assured by DCMS it is imminent, but even Airbnb themselves are calling for this. And having spent much time with housing providers, they believe the only solution is to devise another class of planning for short-term rentals, so councils can differentiate between C3 housing and what would be, in essence, a commercial venture in short-term holiday lets. Local councils could then require licences to run this type of business in a property initially built for full-time residency, and limits could be placed in a community if there is deemed to be an imbalance. We have always welcomed holidaymakers and second homeowners to our beautiful coast, but we have got out of balance, leaving the fabulous pubs, restaurants and hotels that people come to visit, even our surf schools, unable to recruit enough staff. This situation has extended now to our public services, with transferring personnel, however senior, struggling to find housing. With the vast distances between so many communities and the increase in the cost of fuel, plus the absence of public transport, if there are not enough people living close to jobs that are at a living wage, it is simply not worth travelling to get there in North Devon. We have already seen teaching assistants, for example, move out of jobs they love simply so they can work closer to home. And if there are no homes near your job, well, we are increasingly seeing jobs returned, as people simply cannot move into the area. I believe we also need to go beyond just tackling business rates on short-term holiday lets, but tackle the inequalities between mortgage relief on long-term and short-term rentals, which are viewed as a capital asset. Their profits are taxed differently as returns on capital. Both properties were built as homes, and both should be taxed comparatively. Without a register of short-term holiday lets, I imagine there are many paying no tax at all, which is another opportunity for the Treasury. This is a step that could be taken rapidly to make the private rental sector more appealing to landlords, which is ultimately a step we need to take rapidly to begin to provide more housing in the South West. Other steps that could be taken rapidly is to recognise that in Devon particularly, we have a large number of small planning authorities all tackling the same challenges, with most having under-resourced planning departments as detailed in recruitment challenges previously. Can my right honourable friend commit to assist our planning departments to reverse, where appropriate, and at least stop building properties that are solely for holiday lets or second homes and have a clause that exempts people from living there full-time? It's one thing for holiday parks, which are designed this way, but we have actual housing being built with this restriction in place along the North Devon coast. Clearly, on occasions, this is needed, but whilst we have such a shortage of long-term housing, can we not focus on this, as we know we are short of the other resources, land, builders and materials that are needed? Can my right honourable friend also commit to work with the Treasury to look at taxation reforms and how to tackle the issue of empty properties? Again, we have an abundance in North Devon, but it is simply not viable for the Council to spend the time and resource tackling this issue. If we could breathe life into empty buildings, we could again take steps to regenerate additional housing without building all over the beautiful fields of North Devon. And I keep being told that the councils have it in their remit to convert space above empty shops to homes. Please can someone come to Barnstable and make this happen? We have so many empty units with huge storage areas above rather than flats, and tackling this could transform our town centre as well as providing vital accommodation. And finally, please can steps be taken to tackle the issue of viability and barriers to councils in being able to build developments with more than 18% social housing component. I know we English believe our home is our castle, but far too many of the residents of North Devon worry about not having a home at all, causing its own mental health issues, exacerbated further by having so many shortages in mental health services as we can't recruit to fill those vacancies either. We get really big storms in North Devon, and we are stuck in a really big housing one right now. And without urgent intervention, we are literally going to have ghost towns and villages along our coast next winter, as locals have their homes and opportunities to live and work in their community ripped away from them like the Kansas Twister. And Minister, I am hoping we can say goodbye to the yellow brick road and that some affordable housing wizardry will be expedited this afternoon.
Availability of affordable housing in Devon and Cornwall. Ben Bradshaw.
A member for North Devon has admirably outlined the problem that I think many of us in our constituencies face. And mine are slightly different from hers, but carry a lot of similarities. And house prices and extra, if anything, are further inflated by the presence of a very successful university that's grown considerably in recent years, by the fact the city is an attractive place to live, 2 hours from London on the train, and you can cycle and walk to school, so it has all sorts of quality of life benefits. And my local authority has, in my view, got a very good record at doing what it can to ensure the good provision of local social housing and affordable housing to rent. But it really is working against all the time government policy. And there are a number of practical proposals that I had to give the Minister from my local authority that would make their lives much, much easier. For example, we're one of the few local authorities in the region, I think, that always insists on the maximum legal possible requirement for social housing in private developments in Exeter, which has made a huge difference. But it's like pushing a boulder uphill. And repeatedly, not least given the impact of the COVID pandemic, I've been knocking on doors in the local elections, as I'm sure we all have in recent weeks. I've been completely dumbstruck by how many people have arrived in Exeter in the last year or so who've moved out of London, the South East, for a better quality of life, cheaper housing as far as they're concerned. They can now all work for home, and that's making the problem even more acute. So one useful thing the government could do, according to my local authority, is that the right to buy scheme at the moment. We're losing in Exeter 40 council homes a year through the right to buy. We're building 100 a year, but obviously we'd be providing a lot more local council houses if the local council was allowed to keep some of their receipts a bit longer. I know the government extended the length of time, the number of years that local councils could keep those receipts to invest in local housing provision. But because of the current real shortage of construction workers and labour and the difficulty in getting stuff actually built, I'm experiencing this myself, currently renovating a house, it would be really helpful for local authorities if the government could have another look at this and perhaps consider extending the time period under which local authorities can reinvest that money to, say, 10 years. I don't see what the arguments against that would be. It would make local authorities' lives a lot easier. And I know this is a controversial suggestion, but it might also, given the seriousness of the situation outlined by the Honourable Member for North Devon, and the fact this is really a crisis, really serious crisis, if the government would consider suspending the right to buy scheme for a limited period of time, just to protect the stock that we have and enable local authorities to add in net terms the number to them. Because in many cases, the rents in the private sector, even if the private sector rental accommodation is available, are simply out of the reach of many people on the incomes that they manage to command in the South West. The other thing that the Minister could do is to change the way the calculation of affordable is made. At present, the term affordable is applied to a calculation of 80% of the local market value. And in Exeter, as in most places in the South West, this 20% reduction in hugely inflated prices makes absolutely no difference to the majority of potential home buyers, as the cost price is still way out of reach to most local people. So a resetting of the calculation affordable, using, for example, a percentage of the value above building costs, could really make a difference and go a long way to making affordable actually affordable in reality, whereas for most people, affordable is currently not. The Honourable Lady has touched on the issue of second homes and Airbnbs. This is also really serious and has got much worse in the last year or so, and is unlikely to get better, given, I think, what I would predict is the continuing demand by people across the UK for domestic holidays. Again, we really do need a cap, an area-based cap, based on the local housing need, and the percentage of housing used for short-term holiday lets needs to be put into place, even if it's a temporary measure for a couple of years, in order to redress the imbalance of permanent versus temporary housing. Fifthly, planning and HMO regulations. These need to be changed as well. We really need greater powers for local authorities. This is a massive issue in Exeter, so the local authorities can determine the percentage of housing that's permitted for short-term HMO lets based on the housing need in their area, and that they can refuse planning permission for flipping family homes into HMOs once that cap is reached. That would make a significant difference in Exeter, and I'm sure in some of my colleagues here represented today constituencies too. And the sixth thing my local authority said would really help in the short term to address this crisis is a 2-year freeze on private sector rents and a fair rent endorsement backed by the government incentives, such as a deposit underwriting scheme, so that local people could actually afford the private sector, which many of them can't at the moment. Those are just 5 or 6 practical suggestions that I hope the Minister will take away. I'm sure he'll get others from colleagues here today. This is the most serious housing crisis I've experienced in my 25 years as a Member of Parliament. The combination of the cost of living crisis, inflation, and the extraordinary house price inflation, which we've seen even more acutely in beautiful regions like the South West, are creating an unprecedentedly difficult situation for families. And I worry that we're going to see a big increase in homelessness in the months to come unless the government does something about it very quickly.
Do anything but echo all that's been said so far about the challenging situation we find in Devon and Cornwall. It's an acute problem, I believe it particularly faces Devon and Cornwall, and I commend the member for North Devon for securing this debate. It's an extremely timely debate. The lack of quality, affordable housing for local people is not new, but it's not helped by significant population growth. For example, Cornwall in the last couple of years has had the highest net internal migration of any local authority in England and Wales. And it's not helped either. And I don't really want to say this, but it is just a fact, because I'm doing a lot of work on empty homes in my constituency. It's not helped by the fact that the Church of England, the Methodist Church, Cornwall Housing, an arm's length company of Cornwall Council, and Live West, who we all know in Devon and Cornwall, have a lot of empty homes, or combined a lot of empty homes across Cornwall. Both the Methodist and Anglican Church have empty homes in my constituency. And I'm trying to get them used to try and address some of the needs, the significant needs that have already been set out so clearly. Nor is it helped by the fact that long-let homes are being flipped, as we've heard, to holiday lets at an alarming rate. I refer, Mr Hoseley, to my register of interest and to my housing debate in December, where I had more time to set out both the difficulties and potential solutions. During the debate, I called for, probably more ambitiously than has been said so far, for devolved powers to local authorities, Cornwall Council, for example, through the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill. What I'm suggesting, and I believe I've got the support of Cornish colleagues, is that all new homes are restricted for permanent residents only in perpetuity, and that their licence requirement is required if you were to move an existing home that's lived in to be used as a holiday let, a bolt hole, or for any other business purpose. It is helpful. I mean, I would argue that since December, the government haven't done a great deal about trying to resolve this problem. I appreciate legislation is to be announced in the Queen's speech, but I would probably just want to clarify that on the issue of holiday lets, or rather second homes, being able to claim to be able to be exempt from business rates and council tax, the government have actually sought to address that, and from next year, through lots of work that many have done, I've raised it twice in the Chamber over years, and government ran 2 consultations. From next year, I think you have to demonstrate, actually prove to a local authority that you've rented your house out for 70 days before you qualify for that exemption. Personally, I would still say that all homes built to live in should pay council tax. That would be very good for our police and very good for our town and parish councils, who at the moment just lose their income altogether.
The honourable gentleman give way on that
Yeah,
point.
certainly.
If the government decides not to take up your suggestion there, that they should actually look to extend that 70 to 140 days beyond what it is and actually make it more rigorous.
And just stop the opportunity of fraud, because at the end of the day, it's fraud if you're saying you've got a business that you haven't got. But so I'm quite happy to welcome that. But today, Mr Hayes, I want to seek to explain why the pressure on housing has intensified in recent months and years, which regrettably is in part caused by unintended consequence of government policy. And I just want to pick on 2 of them. Government policy is effectively driving landlords out of the market. What we're hearing is that landlords are just, I could use some French, but I'm not going to, just saying we're not going to do this anymore, we're going to flip our homes into holiday let or do something else with our property, because of, partly supported or helped by government policy. So changes, for example, to long-let allowable tax benefits, since April 2020, so it isn't recently that long ago, landlords are no longer able to deduct any of their mortgage expenses from their rental income to reduce their tax bill. The new system means higher or additional rate taxpayers can no longer claim the tax back on their mortgage repayments. Less obviously, the new rules could force some landlords into a tax bracket, putting total income into the, I'll just finish this sentence, into a higher or additional tax rate tax bracket, depending on their income or on pensions or other income. Now, I don't particularly object to that if it's fair across the board, but it is at the moment favouring holiday lets and not helping private landlords.
I very much welcome what my honourable friend's been saying, and I think that we've got to set up a system now with rental where actually we encourage people who are actually having private long-let properties. And I think what we've done is we've made a mistake by targeting them too much, taking away this interest rate, being able to claim that back against the property, because what you actually want is private landlords to actually let good quality property on a long-term rental. And so I think the government should be reversing some of that policy and look at ways where we can actually encourage the private sector to actually put good properties for long-term let.
I completely welcome and agree with that intervention. I don't believe the Treasury deliberately intended to force private landlords out of the market, but that's certainly what's happening. And then can I then go on to energy performance certificates, a pet subject of mine and a debate of its own. But energy performance certificate, basically rental properties now need to require the rating E, which doesn't actually sound particularly ambitious until you try and do it on a property that was built in the 1800s. But since April 2020, landlords can no longer let or continue to let properties covered by the Hmo Regulations if they have an EPC rating below E, unless they have an exemption. An exemption isn't necessarily easy to get, and it still costs you over £3,000 to demonstrate you have to spend that money on the house before you even apply for the exemption. If you're currently planning to let a property with an EPC rating of F or G, you need to improve the rating to even stay within the law. Again, that date is every landlord has to get an EPC rating E. Now, the government's plan to make rented homes greener is not in itself a bad thing, although a wider debate about whether an EPC is the right tool to deliver the desired outcome. Effectively, it's a computer system that invariably says no, without the ability to understand or appreciate the diverse nature of the built environment. But my concern, so I actually don't object to improving homes and making them cheaper to keep and warmer and less impactful for the environment. But my concern is that the landlords seem to be subject to these EPC requirements in a way that holiday lets are not. And the situation is expected to get much worse because the government has consulted on a compulsory energy performance certificate rating of C on new tenancies by December 2025. If they pursue with this, we're talking 3 years from now. And on all rented properties by December 2028. If we think the problem's bad today, it is going to be absolutely disastrous for somewhere like Cornwall, where buildings are built in a very different era to modern building, and I wouldn't even say our building today is that modern. But we are just not going to get properties up to this EPC rating C, so they will be lost to the rental market. Now, these are examples of legislation that applies to long lets, the homes, as the member for that part of the country has quite clearly demonstrated. We are losing these valuable homes that people enjoy. We've heard tenants of 10 years because of legislation that applies to private landlords. It doesn't necessarily apply to people that own holiday lets. So I largely agree with the requirements that have been made, but I just don't believe that it's a level playing field. And irrespective of this government policy, we must avoid a situation where we drive private landlords out of the market. It isn't going to help people that are in a situation where actually there are people who don't wish to own their own home. There are genuinely people like that. And there are lots of people that feel that because of the, again, how we manage the term affordable, are going to find it very difficult to get onto an affordable ladder. But Mr. Jose, I just hope the Minister will understand the severity of the problem for Cornwall Yard City. It's urgent right now. I have so many constituents who are in a desperate situation, and it needs rapid and effective intervention that really provides a home, a secure home for life, whether that's owned or privately rented. Thank you. Or rented.
Farmer.
Thank you, Mr. Hody, Devonshire, and a massive congratulations to the member for North Devon for securing what is a really important debate. And a kind of apology to colleagues here, but I am a member of Parliament for a Western county. Indeed. But I also think more seriously, we need to hunt as a pack, because the issues that affect Devon and Cornwall will affect Northumberland, North Yorkshire, Somerset, Wiltshire, Cumbria, Shropshire and other places as well. And the member for North Devon was right to say that we should be sparing in our use of the word crisis, and right to use it in this case, because there is no doubt that rural communities like ours are under huge pressure and were before the pandemic, but the pandemic has turbocharged a problem that existed to start off with. I want to just echo something that the Right Honourable Member for Exeter said earlier on. The word affordable has become almost meaningless in terms of the way in which it is applied. If in Devon or Cornwall or Cumbria you offer a house for sale at £200,000, it's not affordable. The reality is that we've got maybe average household incomes in the 20s of thousands and average house prices of at least $250,000. That's a broken system, a broken market, and a believer in a free market would intervene and referee to try to make it fairer. And that, I think, is what we're all trying to encourage the government to take seriously. We represent desirable places, beautiful places, great communities, and welcoming communities. And it is right to get the tone spot on here. We are not saying to people who visit our communities or might make their homes in our communities or even have second homes in our communities that they're not welcome. We are welcoming people. That is what we are. We're British people. We are welcoming people. And our communities thrive, our economies thrive because of the tourism economy that underpins them. But we cannot ignore the fact that excessive second home ownership, excessive holiday lets and excessive house prices in general and the lack of availability of affordable homes for families who are either local or who want to become local is a serious problem, and in a broken market you'd want to intervene and fix it, wouldn't you? So the impact of excessive second home ownership is the death of communities. It's the fact that you have a village or a town that lacks the number of permanent residents to allow it to support a school, a pub, a post office, a bus route. And as a result, those communities become sad, they die, and they end having any functional existence at all. And no one wants to come on holiday to a dead community. We want to protect those communities so that they are alive and they are living. During the pandemic, and I say it's turbocharged an existing problem, estate agents in my patch will report that anything between 50 and 80% of all house sales in the Lakes have been into the second home sector, a steady attrition of an already reducing permanent housing stock. Holiday lets. Obviously, holiday lets are vital underpinning to any tourism economy. However, if you have too many, where do they come from? So again, in my district council area, in 1 year during the pandemic, there was a 32% rise in the number of holiday lets. They're not been magicked from nowhere. They came about from long-term lets, as the Honourable Member for North Devon rightly pointed out, long-term lets where the landlord has ejected the tenants using a Section 21 eviction, and we then see that place typically ending up, but not only, on B&B. And that means, in an area like mine, and I imagine Devon and Cornwall very similar, where you've got very high levels of employment, very low levels of unemployment. Typically what you see in those circumstances is a couple with children, both of whom have jobs, with kids in the local schools, having to leave those jobs, take the children out of those schools to move to somewhere urban just about affordable, 50 miles away maybe. And it kills local communities. It's tragic for the individuals and the families concerned, and it's also a massive blow to the life of that community. It's also worth bearing in mind when we look at new build, wherever we live, the danger, I think, is we've perhaps got into the mindset that fewer planning regulations are better for creating more homes. That's not true. Planning authorities, whether they be national parks or local authorities, have to have the power to be able to direct what kind of homes are built to make them more likely to happen. We are constantly in this country building to meet demand, but not building to meet need. And that's what creates, shall we say, an opposition to there being new developments. In most communities like mine, the people are the opposite of NIMBYs. They're desperate for new homes, but homes that people need. You can build a nice 4-bedroom, 5-bedroom property in Cornwall or Devon or Cumbria, and of course it'll sell, someone will buy it, but it's not what that community needed, and we need planning laws that make sure that the homes that are built are green, are sustainable and affordable, and are there to underpin the local community, the local economy. I'd happily give way.
Recognise what the Secretary of State is trying to do using his Biden acronym, meaning build beautifully, make sure there's infrastructure, hold developers to account, take into account the environment, and make sure neighbourhood plans are fully weighted.
Yes, and I think that is massively important, because if the community supports a development, it's that much more likely to happen. One of the things that I regret is that we don't enforce zero carbon homes. I also regret the fact that we still permit, through the massively outdated and hugely damaging 1961 Land Compensation Act, the inflation of the value of land, which inflates the price of houses. Those are things that could be tackled. So you give local authorities, local communities more power, you build better houses, more beautiful houses, greener houses. Do you want to come back? Yeah, happily.
I do, and you make an excellent point, one that I wholeheartedly agree on. And so hopefully when the planning bill does come back, he might be supportive of the Honourable Member for Runnymede enforcement 10-minute rule bill that was put forward a few months back, which is specifically designed to make sure that the plans presented to a community or to a local council are not altered when they come to actually developing the site, either driving down affordability, driving down the greenness or environmentally friendly nature of those developments.
The honourable gentleman makes an excellent point and risks me going off on one about viability assessments and so on, and the fact that when conditions are made, they should be applied. And we need the government to back national parks and local authorities who impose conditions, got through the planning game, got the affordability in there, and then the developers say, we found some rocks in the field, costs too much money to do that now. We need to make sure that communities get what they were promised and not otherwise. So he makes an excellent point. I will be really quick in my final remarks, really, and to say that, the impact on communities is huge. The impact on the economy is massive as well. We had a vote the other night on the workforce amendment when it comes to health and social care workforces. In communities like ours, as has been mentioned by honourable and right honourable members already, we have a serious problem. We are, on the whole, older communities. My community is about 10 years above the national average age. So smaller working age populations. And if you do something to squeeze those people out even further, then you find, well, you've got nobody to run your health service. People will take jobs in the local hospital, in a care home, then check the housing market and give back word. And that happens all the time, has been mentioned already. Cumbria Tourism did a survey of their own members just a few months ago and discovered that last year, 63% of Lake District hospitality businesses worked below capacity last year, despite the demand being there. Why? Because they just didn't have the staff in order to be able to meet that demand, and in part it's because of the issues we have raised today. So what could we do? Very quickly, change planning law to make first homes and second homes and holiday lets separate categories of planning use, so that planning authorities and councils can enforce affordability and availability and make sure there is at least a limit on the number of second homes and holiday lets in a particular community. We could allow, as the Welsh Senate government has decided to do, local authorities to increase council tax above 100% on second homes. Councils would have that choice to do that. They wouldn't have to, but they can have that choice. As has been mentioned by the member for St Ives quite rightly, making sure that every property that's built as a residence, council tax should be paid upon it. The simple fact is, if you are a wealthy person with a second home on the Lizard Peninsula or in the Lake District, you are able to have somebody who is on the breadline, somebody who's literally going to the food bank in the same community to subsidise you not paying any tax on your second home because you've managed to let it out for 70 days a year, so you pay no council tax, and you're a small business, so you pay no business rate either. That is an outrage from the Exchequer's point of view, and it's morally outrageous also that we have people barely getting by subsidising wealthy people who are able to afford 2, 3, 4 or more homes. We need also to make sure that Section 21 evictions are abolished, as the government promised to do in their manifesto, and we also need to think about the point at which we decide a second home has become a holiday let and raise the bar from 70 nights to maybe over 100 nights, maybe make it consistent with what HMRC say. I think it's 105 nights a year to be able to qualify as a holiday let. And my final point is this. I agree with pretty much everything everyone said in this debate so far, and we've been mentioning and raising this for years. I remember raising this with the junior planning minister a few years ago, a gentleman who is now the Chancellor of the Exchequer. And I am concerned that we make these points. It's obvious these points are an issue and that there needs to be action to tackle the lack of affordable housing in rural communities, and yet the government still refuses to take the action that it needs to do to deliver for those communities. So I hope, in a spirit of solidarity together, hunting as a pack, the Minister might listen and take the action that rural communities need.
Thank you very much, Mr. Herbert. May I start by congratulating my honourable friend for securing this debate and for making her case so strongly. I think it's about time the government realised that one of the solutions to our energy problems in this country is to plug my honourable friend into the national grid, because her energy, I think, could power many, many homes over the coming months. I would like to draw the House's attention to my entry in the Register of Interests as a non-executive director of Rent Plus Limited, a company started in Plymouth that provides affordable rent to buy homes for local people, especially key workers. Now, Mr. Hosey, the housing market is complex and challenging, and throughout my 30 years at Westminster, there's never been enough affordable housing to rent or to buy, to meet demand, and there probably never will be, especially in hotspots like Devon and Cornwall. Because we're such a delightful destination, as we've heard, many people seek to retire to our region, pushing prices high, often out of reach of local people. And the recent spasm of people selling their homes in cities and moving to the countryside in these pandemic years has only exacerbated this problem. And this has resulted in many local people being unable to save the necessary deposit and fulfil their aspiration of home ownership. And this was recognised in the recent House of Lords report called Meeting Housing Demand in paragraph 43. I'm sure you're familiar, Mr. Hosey, with this, when they stated, quote, given that average deposits are £59,000, saving for a deposit is impossible for many renters on low incomes, especially as research before the COVID-19 pandemic showed that 45% of private renters in England did not have enough savings to pay their rent for more than 1 month if they lost their job. Although it may be the case that preferences have shifted towards renting in the short term as a lifestyle choice, the main constraint on achieving home ownership remains an inability to save the required deposit, a goal that becomes increasingly out of reach if house prices rise faster than savings, unquote. Well, that's exactly what we're now seeing. So this deposit barrier problem remains a significant challenge in the South West. Now, from the time I was the housing chairman on Plymouth City Council in the late 1980s until now, I have maintained an interest in social rented housing, and there has, as I said before, never been enough of it, not when councils were the main providers, not under 13 years even of a Labour government, and not under the last 25 years or so when housing associations have been the main providers. But during those years, there had always been a buoyant private sector rented market for those who could not afford to buy and could not access social rented housing. Now, of course, this is an insecure way to live. I would hate to live like that because you are at the whim of a landlord who might decide to sell the property or, for whatever reason, evict you on just a few months' notice. But at least there was plenty of it in our region. Many people had a second property which they let out as an additional or retirement income. It was a buoyant market until the last 2 years. And the impact, as we've heard, of COVID inflated prices and the rise of Airbnb has meant that in our region, landlords have been quitting the private rented sector in droves, either selling their property to catch the rising tide or turning their properties over to Airbnb where they can make 3 or 4 times the return. So this has decimated this market, meaning that many key workers, as we've heard from my honourable friend who led the debate so well, many key workers simply cannot find accommodation near their jobs or at all. And this unprecedented shift in market conditions is putting enormous pressure on families desperate for a home in our region. And naturally, the market has also responded to scarcity, as it always does, by rising prices. So that a 2-bedroom property in Plympton, in my constituency, which typically was £650 to £700 per month, a 2-bedroom property for several years, and certainly 2 years ago, that was about the going rate, is now £850 to £900. And when you add that to spiralling energy costs and council tax always creeping up, many people are simply priced out of the market. And of course, the housing allowance at £550 for a similar property, that hasn't kept pace. And yes, of course.
The member raises an important point about the housing allowance, because actually the average price of a rental in Cornwall at the moment for a 3-bedroom place is £1,400 a month, which is completely out of the reach of most working families on an average Cornish income. Would the member agree?
I do agree, and people use the word crisis earlier, but none of us like using it, but this is a crisis, and many constituents are really struggling to find a suitable home. So I want to add my question to the questions that others have posed to the Minister, and let's be honest about it. We know this Minister has the intellect and the stamina to grapple with these complex problems. What is the government going to do about this current gross distortion of the private rented market in regions like our own in Devon and Cornwall to ensure that our constituents can access reasonably priced housing? Is he having discussions with the Treasury? Perhaps he'll tell us about taxation policy on Airbnb. Is his department looking at new regulations to ensure that Airbnb standards and safety are at least as high as the general rented market to ensure a level playing field? And why has the consultation on these issues taken so long to be deployed? Now, I appreciate that we are Conservatives and we believe in the market, But where it moves so dramatically and quickly against our constituents, we have to find effective ways to intervene. Now, finally, turning to the wider long-term problems of affordability, the government appears to be placing its trust in two main pillars. Firstly, namely first homes on the one hand and shared ownership on the other, with very little in between. I wonder whether the first homes policy, with an inbuilt discount to be handed on in perpetuity, will survive the test of time. And I have to confess, I do foresee tremendous problems when owners of their first house have to pass on the discount when they sell it. How will they then make the jump to their second house, which will be priced in the open market? I've never really understood how that's going to happen. So I question that policy. And then the continued focus on shared ownership, which very few people like, and very few people ever end up owning the whole, really hasn't delivered the scale of accessible homes that was originally envisaged. There seems to be a significant... My older friend wishes to intervene, of course.
I apologise for interrupting my friend and neighbour, but as he's been making a brilliant speech on this point, I thought I'd just remind the House and this gathering of MPs is that we have the highest rate of second homes and Airbnb properties in Devon at 8.2%, and he's making a point about how we can help people get onto the housing ladder. Could I add a third suggestion, which is encouraging people to be able to use their pensions as their deposits to get on the housing ladder, and that is then ring-fenced in the value of the house, that if they ever sell on, it can then be put back into their pension in the future.
Well, my honourable friend is full of very interesting ideas, and here comes another one, which I'm sure the Minister will take will look at very carefully and be sympathetic to. So there is a significant gap, I think, in the middle between the two main housing policy pillars the government is currently pursuing, and many of our constituents are falling into that gap. So here's a thought for the Minister, and I conclude on this. Would he give some thought to calling a conference or a round table in the South West this summer to discuss our challenging housing needs? To hear from key workers and employers about the frustrations and costs of accessing housing in our hotspot area, and to hear from housing providers and landlords about the current landscape and their frustrations and the things that work and don't work, and also to hear from innovative providers of housing how they might, working together with government, help meet the needs and aspirations of our constituents. I do believe that such a collective brainstorm could help to find both short-term and long-term solutions to our housing crisis. So I conclude with these words, Mr. Hosey, if I may. The housing market in Devon and Cornwall, whether to rent or buy, has always been challenging for local people. But in my 30 years, it's never been as bad as it currently is. It is a crisis, and urgent remedial action is required. Thank you.
I want to thank my honourable friend, my neighbour, for those remarks. It has been a cross-party agreement that I have not seen from Devon and Cornwall for quite some time on this, and I want to thank the member for North Devon for her introduction. I think she summed up the problem really very well. And on the opposite side of the coast of Devon, as I am to her, I think the challenges on the south coast are very similar. But actually, they are all part of the same pattern. And this is a frustration for many of us in the West Country, because this problem has been growing for years after years after years. I like this minister. I think he's a good minister. But I also know that the housing minister has a ticking time bomb before they get replaced at the next inevitable reshuffle. So we need to make sure that we get the impact done early. Not long consultations, not long discussion documents, but action delivered in the near term. And that's what I hope the minister will be able to do. My starting point for this one, Mr. Hosey, is a simple one. Every family in the South West should be able to afford a first home, be it to rent or to buy. But we are fast becoming a region of second homes, Airbnbs and holiday lets. Our communities are being hollowed out. And that is something that is proceeding at pace. The pandemic is turbocharging the housing crisis that we have in the South West. But the measures to react to it are not coming in the same pace. And we need to look at that again. There are far too many people waiting on housing waiting lists. There are nearly 10,000 in Plymouth on our housing waiting list. That's people living in overcrowded accommodation, living in B&Bs, not the Airbnbs we've spoken about, but accommodation that's not suitable for long-term occupancy. And we need to do something about it that it means everyone can have a first home. Now, Plymouth operates the Housing First model, And I commend the council, be it red or blue, for adopting this approach that says the first thing that we should do for any person in crisis or having difficulties is provide a safe and secure roof over their head. I wish all councils were to follow that suit. It is a good one. But we are running out of roofs to put over people. We need to make sure that we are building at the right pace and that we're making sure those homes are genuinely affordable. I agree with the remark about 80% affordable not being affordable. That is spin. It's a simple spin to try and persuade the public that enough action was being taken when it's not. 80% affordable is not affordable, and we must not fall for that. Nor must we believe that the dream of home ownership is available for everyone. That is spin from a decade ago. Home ownership is out of the reach for the vast majority of young people in the southwest. It is something that is accentuating the brain drain out of our region at the very point when we have an opportunity to seize the potential of the southwest, to have more people living here. The average house price for a first-time buyer in Devon is $258,000. You need a 10% deposit, that's £25,000. That's too much for many people on low incomes in the West Country. We do need to make sure there's alternative routes in there. And with more families struggling to pay bills, that makes saving up for a house deposit, be it for the private rented sector or for purchase, so much harder as well. We've seen a massive surge in homes being purchased to become second homes. And this is contributing to the hollowing out of our communities. We've also at the same time seen people renting a property on the private rented market being evicted under a Section 21 no-fault eviction, and on the same day as they are being evicted, that property appearing on Airbnb. It's a good way for landlords to make a lot of money. It's a bad way to have a sustainable community and families in need. And the cost of that family now in crisis falls on the taxpayer. It is something that's completely unsustainable. The private rented sector in large parts of the southwest has collapsed. We are experiencing market failure. There is therefore a need for urgent intervention that we have not seen in the past decade on this point. Happy to.
He's making an excellent speech, and I totally agree with the point that he's making. But what we need to do is look, exactly as the member for St Ives said, is covenants on properties saying primary residence only. And that must be on new builds, but it can also be on buildings that are bought into housing associations or houses that are sold in the market. We must look at how we can adopt that strategy.
I thank him for his intervention, and I think there's a good route for covenants. As someone whose little sisters work in farming, for instance, the agricultural ties on some properties is a really important way of making sure that some people are able to afford to live in a rural area and work in agriculture. But we know those agricultural ties are too often being severed from properties, and those properties then being turned into holiday lets or empty second homes. I do agree with the suggestion that my neighbour made from South West Devon about an urgent housing conference in the southwest. And I think there is a special need here because the southwest is experiencing this problem ahead of many other regions, notwithstanding our Lib Dem friends from Cumbria here, but we are hitting this problem first because we have the highest number of second homes, the highest number of Airbnb penetrations, but it is going to come to every other region of England and every other region of our country. So instead of us being the recipient of bright ideas in London, let the bright ideas come from the communities that are being affected the most. I think this is an excellent suggestion that I'm sure would enjoy full cross-party support to make sure it works. But there's opportunities here. Now, the Minister will know, because I've badgered him, as I have badgered the Shadow Minister on this, that the proposals for a First Home, Not Second Homes campaign that I've worked up with colleagues from Cornwall and across Devon puts the emphasis of this policy on ensuring that everyone can afford a first home. It's a principled moral stance about home occupancy that we need to be looking at. And I hope he will look carefully at the devolution proposals that's come from Devon and Cornwall about what powers, additional powers over second homes and Airbnbs could be included in our devolution deal to make sure that we're better able to take that on board. Because the personal stories are harrowing. Ellen from Plymouth told me that her and her 7-month-old daughter have had to flee domestic violence and placed in a hotel, but there's building work outside from 8 a.m. in the morning to 8 p.m. It's simply unaffordable for her to move into the private rented sector, and there's not social housing available for her in her band. Colleagues from Cornwall have shared stories of people working unable to afford the rent increases this year, now facing homelessness or the need to move out of our region. There's one particular case that I've been working on for many years about the lack of accessible housing. So not just affordable housing, but accessible housing for those with disabilities. This is especially acute in a city like Plymouth, where our housing stock is already compressed. And so the ability for people with a disability to have accommodation might be possible in a one-bedroom flat. We have a few of those, But if that disabled person has a family, as many of them do, they're not able to access that accommodation because it simply does not exist. There is no vehicle for that accommodation to be built and to be funded, so therefore they sit in perpetuity in a no man's land that is simply unacceptable about where we get to. There are some suggestions that have been made, and I agree with nearly all the suggestions that have been made so far. The First Homes Not Second Homes campaign has been picking out some suggestions that aren't always in the public domain. I would like the Minister to consider allowing local councils to quadruple council tax, not just on empty properties, but on second homes. The Welsh Labour government introducing that 300% council tax on second homes, I think is an interesting pioneer project here. I'd encourage the Minister to look at it, notwithstanding the difference between party colours, because we need to get this right. Our communities are being hollowed out by second homes, but that means looking at how we are getting our communities hollowed out. And one of those areas I'd like him to look at is the enforcing of covenants on right-to-buy properties. Councillors Jane Kirkham and Councillors Kate Ewart, two Labour councillors in Cornwall, have been pressing Cornwall County Council to ensure that covenants on right-to-buy properties that exclude those properties being used as holiday lets must be enforced, because far too many of them are being used as holiday lets. So that, I think, is an opportunity for us to look at again, and I commend their work that they've been doing here. The First Homes Not Second Homes manifesto also deals with the fact that our communities are being hauled out from the last shop in the village. So it's about the bus routes going because there's not enough daily traffic. It's about the shop not being able to make enough money all year round, although they might do well in the summer months. There's a real opportunity for that. The final point, Mr. Hosey, that I just want to make is we need to build more homes, but we also need to retrofit the homes we've got. Far too many of our homes, especially in places like Plymouth, frankly, are too poor quality. 43% of the people I represent live in the private rented sector. There are some really brilliant landlords in Plymouth, but sadly there are a number of landlords that have let their houses deteriorate. And so we do need to make sure that there's an incentive to properly insulate, properly secure properties, which will lower the bills, which might make the end product making them more affordable. But we are in a state of housing crisis here. Our market is failing, and that's why I look to the Minister for urgent action that can be delivered this year, not sometime ahead. And I commend the suggestions that have been made on a cross-party basis here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hosey. It's a pleasure to serve with you in the chair. I congratulate the Honourable Lady, the member for North Devon, for securing this debate, for the thoughtful way in which she opened it, and for her tenacity in returning to this issue time and again. I know she's been highlighting it since she was elected. I'd also like to thank all of those members who participated this afternoon. We've had a series of excellent contributions, as well as a range of practical suggestions and questions, which I hope the Minister will respond to. As many of the honourable members present will be aware, having taken part in them, this is not the first debate this year to grapple with the issues of access and affordability in relation to housing in rural and coastal communities. Indeed, there have been several Westminster Hall debates over recent months in which members from across the House have raised serious concerns, in particular about the impact of second homes and short-term and holiday lets on the availability and affordability of homes for local people in their constituencies to buy and to rent. That in itself, Mr. Hosey, speaks to the importance of the matter we're debating this afternoon to a great many people across the country, as well as the pressing need for more to be done to address the problem so that we get the balance right between the benefits that second homes and short-term lets undoubtedly bring to local economies and their impact on local people. It's clear from the strength of feeling that's been expressed in this debate, as well as those other recent debates I mentioned, that there remains a clear view amongst a sizable number of honourable members on both sides of the House that, as things stand, the government haven't done enough and have not got that balance right. That lack of action on the part of the government has real consequences, and I don't think it is hyperbole to use, as many honourable members have done, the word crisis. I think this is a crisis, particularly as it applies to Devon and Cornwall, but also other parts of England, as we've heard. What does that crisis look like? As we've heard, as well as entailing the loss of a significant proportion of the permanent population and the impact that has on local services and amenities, as well as the sustainability and cohesion of communities, excessive and growing rates of second home ownership in a great many rural and coastal areas are having a direct impact on affordability and therefore the availability of local homes, particularly for local first-time buyers. The staggering growth in short-term and holiday lets in many rural and coastal communities is having the same detrimental impact, albeit not only on the number of affordable homes for local people to buy, but also in terms of access to private rentals, as we heard, for those who cannot buy and also cannot secure social housing. Incidentally, Ms Hosey, when it comes to the shrinking private rental markets in many rural and coastal communities, the issue is not only one of access, but as we've heard, one of security. Many renters in these parts of the country, particularly key workers, are finding that their landlord wishes to begin using their property exclusively as a short-term or holiday let, and they're evicted as a result. Yet another reason for the government, who I have to say to the Minister, have failed to bring forward a renters' reform bill in this session, despite promising to do so in the Queen's speech, to get on with it and finally introduce the legislation necessary to ban no-fault evictions, rather than delaying matters for another year, year and a half with a white paper. What then needs to happen to ensure we make available more affordable housing in Devon and Cornwall and other rural and coastal communities across the country? First, as I've said on previous occasions, there's clearly more that can be done to mitigate the negative impact of excessive numbers of second homes and holiday lets. When it comes to non-planning levers, primarily taxation, we accept that the government has taken action over recent years by reforming stamp duty, allowing local authorities to increase council tax to 100% for second homes, and proposing that properties be required to have been let for 70 days in any given financial year to be liable for business rates rather than council tax. However, there is a strong case for going further. We believe the government should explore providing local authorities with powers to, for example, introduce licensing regimes for second homes and short-term lets, and giving them even greater discretion over their council tax regimes, perhaps allowing, as my honourable friend just mentioned, local authorities, as Labour has done in government in Wales, to levy a premium or surcharge on second homes and long-term empty properties if they believe that is what is required in their locality. And there remains also, Ms Hosey, a strong case, I believe, for reviewing whether the current 3% rate of stamp duty surcharge on second homes, as well as the 5% rate levied on non-UK buyers, is set at the appropriate level in light of the boom that we've witnessed over the course of the pandemic. When it comes to planning levers, the system does now enable local residents to put in place local neighbourhood plans that can go some way to managing second home ownership rates, but again, it's clear that further measures are required. We believe the government should explore further changes in relation specifically to planning, restrictions and enforcement that might enable local authorities to bear down on excessive numbers of second homes and holiday lets in a way that, if designed well, wouldn't exacerbate the problems of affordability and availability that have been touched on in the debate today. Second, Ms Hosey, as well as doing more to mitigate the negative impact of, in particular, second homes and holiday lets, ministers really do need to start grappling with what reforms are required to deliver the right quantity of new housing in the right places at prices that local people can actually afford. They need to do so because at present the government are failing to deliver on this front, both in terms of sufficient numbers of new affordable homes to rent, where ministers are presiding over a system that sees a net loss of thousands of genuinely affordable social rented homes each and every year, and new affordable homes to buy. Now, the Honourable Member for South West Devon mentioned shared ownership as well as the first home scheme. I could spend a long time speaking about the deficiencies of shared ownership as an intermediate model, but taking the government's flagship first home scheme as the primary example, what I gently suggest to the Minister is that, like its starter homes forerunner, the policy looks to all intents and purposes to me like it is already an abject failure. Not only is it leading to a significant reduction in the number of social and affordable homes for rent by top-slicing funding secured through Section 106 agreements, but house prices in the period since it was first introduced, coupled with a rising new build premium, have eroded the value of the first homes discount, by my calculations, in almost 3/4 of local authority areas. Already, the discount has been eroded. The simple fact is that this policy doesn't address the underlying reasons why young people and key workers cannot get onto the housing ladder, particularly in areas with overheated housing markets like Devon and Cornwall. Labour are committed to giving first-time buyers first dibs on new homes in their local area and to establishing a new definition of affordable, set at a rate of 30% of local incomes rather than the present definition, which is linked to those overheated market rates we've discussed. Ms Hosey, I'll conclude at this point by saying simply that I think it's been a worthwhile debate, and one to which I have no doubt we will return once again in the next session, unless the government decide to heed the demands of honourable members, including many on their own side, and act on this issue and act quickly. And I very much look forward to hearing from the Minister, both that the government are minded to do so and precisely what that action will entail.
Stuart Andrew. Minister.
Thank you,
you very much, Mr Hosey. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And can I also start by thanking my honourable friend, the member for North Devon, for championing this cause and bringing this debate before us today. I had literally been in the job for about 4.5 minutes when she came hurtling up towards me, and she said, "I have 2 words for you." She was more polite than other 2 words that people gave me, and that was second home, she said. And she has been relentless, as honourable friends have referred to, in making sure that this is high up in my head of issues that needs to be dealt with. But so have honourable members across the South West and in other parts of the country and cross-party in presenting the real issues that their communities are facing. And they are all incredibly important challenges that we are facing in the housing sector. And I want to also thank her for being a torchbearer for the concerns of her constituents, and in particular Carol, Rachel, Catherine and Stephanie, whose responses she has highlighted today. And I want to start my response with a statement of the obvious, which is that people in communities up and down the country deserve access to good quality and affordable housing. But that is not the reality that many people in this country live with. To deliver on that ambition, our focus needs to be laser-like on the need to level up the country by increasing the supply of affordable homes in all regions. And we as a government are acutely aware of the unique set of circumstances that exist in our coastal communities around supply, around second homes, and around the looming effects of climate change. I believe we are all in agreement that we need more affordable homes, and that successive governments of all colours, frankly, have fallen short of that goal. We've made it a fundamental part of our levelling up agenda so that we can try and start to rectify this, recognising that it is in our national interest for every community in the country to have a strong supply of high quality, sustainable housing. Where you live should not limit your access to that supply. And we're making real progress. Since 2010, we have delivered over 574,000 new affordable homes across the country. In the South West alone, we've delivered over 63,000 new affordable homes since 2010. But ultimately, we know we need to build more because, for a whole variety of reasons, supply has simply not kept up with demand in recent decades. That acknowledgement underpins the Affordable Homes Programme, a programme comprised of £11 billion worth of investment designed to tackle the twin issues of affordability and supply. It's the largest investment in a decade, and I'm hopeful that my honourable friend will be aware that the South West is currently receiving one of the largest allocations from the programme, with £1 billion earmarked for the delivery of 17,500 new affordable homes across the region. The programme fits with our determination to turn generation rent into generation of homeowners. Through the programme, we've said that approximately half of the homes constructed will be for affordable home ownership, supporting aspiring homeowners to take the first step onto the housing ladder. The programme will also deliver more than double the number of social rent homes than the current programme, with around 32,000 homes for social rent. And I accept that that is an incredibly important element of what we have to do. And I am keen, as the Vice Honourable Member for Exeter mentioned, that we also explore how we can help councils start rebuilding council housing again. And the points he raised are interesting ones, which I will take away and happily respond to him in writing if he's in agreement. It is our aim to support thousands of hard-working people with funding that will help them experience the unique sense of pride that comes with owning your own home, and in turn will help us to level up parts of the country, such as the South West, by creating new jobs for home builders, for SME developers, electricians and plumbers alike. It's a programme that recognises the scale of the challenge in front of us, with major investments to tackle affordability, re-energise the housing sector, and most importantly, to build back better from the pandemic. Now, as a government, we also recognise the need to address the impact that the large numbers of second homes and short-term holiday lets has on not just the local housing market, but on the communities themselves, as all members have referred to today. And as my honourable friend illuminated powerfully in her earlier speech, this is particularly true in our rural and coastal communities, including in her constituency. I want to be clear that this government wholeheartedly supports responsible, short-term letting, and we absolutely recognise the economic benefits this can have in our favourite holiday hotspots. But these benefits should not come at the detriment of local communities. Landlords who let out accommodation on a short-term basis must do so responsibly and in accordance with the law. We are already taking action to address the fact that there is such a high concentration of second homes in these regions, and I'm of the view that it is not only fair that second homeowners pay their fair share towards their local services that benefit from it. It's also important to re-emphasise the point about the introduction of higher rates of stamp duty land tax for those purchasing additional properties and tightening tax rules for second home owners. Large numbers of second homes should not block the path to home ownership for local people, and the measures we've introduced will help to mitigate their impact. That said, I am, as I said right at the beginning, aware of the seriousness of this situation. And my honourable friend, the member for South West Devon, made a suggestion of me holding a round table in his region. He will be pleased to know that this is something I have already suggested to officials in my department, and I look forward to making those arrangements as soon as possible, because I do want to hear from local partners about suggestions that they may have, but also to try and fully understand, being actually there, the impact that it's having on local communities. And I now expect there'll be 1 million invitations to go to each constituency whilst I'm there, and that will be something I would very much look forward to. I wanted to come on to the planning issues that some mentioned. Now, central to tackling the issues that honourable members have raised are the need to deliver the right homes in the right places. Existing planning tools are already helping. For example, local plans such as in the Yorkshire Dales can protect a share of housing for local residents. Some communities, particularly in the South West, have chosen to include policies in their neighbourhood plans to require new open market housing to be occupied as principal residence. And in addition, Section 106 agreements can apply a local connection test to protect a share of new housing for local people. And our First Home scheme enables local authorities to prioritise discounted homes for local people through Section 106, with discounts as a minimum of 30%. We have also made changes to the planning system to meet some of the numerous challenges that honourable members have rightly drawn attention to. Last August, we introduced a new permitted development right to allow for the change of use from buildings in the new commercial, business and service use class to residential use. Now, I was interested to hear of the challenges that are being faced, and perhaps on my visit to the South West, we can see whether, I'm not promising to bring the trowel and the bucket myself, but at least I can see some of the problems that she alluded to. But that does mean that a wider range of commercial buildings can make the change to residential use without the need for planning applications. And this can, for example, apply to the space above shops. We've also introduced new permitted development rights to allow 2 additional stories to be added to existing buildings, such as houses, flats and commercial buildings, to create new homes. These rights will continue to deliver new homes which might not otherwise come forward through the planning system. Now, we recognise that there are currently capacity challenges, and we want to ensure that local authority planning departments are equipped and have the right skills to make creative decisions, enabling us to take forward ambitious proposals for levelling up. We are engaging with representatives from across local government, the private sector and professional bodies to consider ways in which we can make sure local authorities are equipped to deliver places people can be proud of and have the skills needed to deliver an efficient planning service. The other thing I want to touch on is levelling up itself. And when I think about levelling up today, I view it as the tool that exists to prevent the kind of Kansas-style twisters that the honourable member described. Now, I won't go as far as saying levelling up is a miracle on the Wizard of Oz scale, and I can't promise her that I've got my ruby slippers on today, but despite my appreciation for the reference, what I will say is that it is a blueprint that has the potential to transform the fortunes of towns and cities all over the country. The Honourable Member was right when she drew attention to regional disparities running through this country like fault lines. These issues transcend every part of society in this country. There are issues around lack of opportunities, issues around lack of good quality jobs, issues around life prospects being diminished by areas being overlooked and undervalued. Places across the country with proud histories, like North Devon, that have seen generation after generation leave the area with the promise of a better, brighter future that simply didn't feel possible or affordable in the area in which they were living. You only need to look at some of the high streets across some of our communities around the country to see that places have been taken for granted for too long. Even places like Devon and Cornwall that draw millions of tourists, places with rich cultural heritages, have at times been like a jet plane being powered with only one of its engines. And we know it's not enough to simply identify the problem and say we're going to fix it. We need to walk the walk, and our Levelling Up blueprint sets out exactly how we're going to do that. There have been a number of points that honourable and right honourable members have raised today, and I am at the moment looking at all of these issues because I have literally heard loud and clear from colleagues not just in the southwest but up in the Lake District and in Norfolk and in other tourist hotspots about the issues that are being faced. And I want to take all of these ideas, and I appreciate actually the way that colleagues have conducted this debate today because it has been useful. It is interesting to hear all of those suggestions. These are things that I will be taking away to consider very carefully so that we can try and address some of the problems that many colleagues have been raising with me already, have raised today, and I'm sure will keep knocking at my door in the days and weeks to come.
So then, Saxby, to wind up briefly.
Thank you, Mr. Hosier, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chair, and I'm delighted to welcome colleagues here to speak this afternoon. Thank you all for coming, and thank you to the Minister for his response. The Roundtable, of course, will be welcoming you to North Devon as the first bid for that trip. I'd already texted. I think that what I really would like to stress this afternoon is the urgency of this, and that we have been talking about this for a very long time, and whilst we recognise the Minister is relatively new in post, we have been here before and we need something to happen this summer, please. So I hope he will be able to nudge his colleagues in the Treasury and DCMS to deliver the bits of the jigsaw puzzle beyond. But thank you this afternoon.
This House has considered the availability of affordable housing in Devon and Cornwall. As many as are of that opinion say aye. If the contrary no, the ayes have it, the ayes have it. Order, order. The sitting is suspended until 4 p.m.